right, I think I'll start talking now. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Looks like a party in the back and business in the front, so that's really cute. It's like a mullet. That's my first joke of the evening, thank you. All right. So today I'm here to talk about how embracing failure led me to quitting a career in big tech and then finding Web3. Okay. So the first time I ever encountered the word failure was when I was 12 years old. I was sitting in the computer room on the shared family computer, just doing my thing, and then one of those email chains came through, like one of the type that say forward to your 12 best friends or you'll get like 10 years of bad luck or like your cat will die or something like that. And they have the type of questions like what is the initial of your crush, like have you had your first kiss? I'm a big fan of those emails. I loved like the drama they produced. But this particular email thread, I remember, really made me think because after the standard email chain question, who is your celebrity crush, to which I said Justin Bieber, obviously, I faced a question I had never really thought of before. And that was, what is your biggest fear? And I was stumped. I didn't really have any fears at 12 years old, like maybe long-distance flights or getting a bloody nose in class or like spiders or something. But as a very precocious 12-year-old, I didn't think that those answers would quite suffice this particular email chain. So once I had a long, hard think about it, I quite contently typed that my biggest fear was failure. In all caps, aquamarine times New Roman, which was my signature style then. And I finished the rest of the question, sent it off to the next recipient, and carried on with my day. But I remember when I went to bed that evening, and the next day in school, and the next day after that, I started to feel this like self-perpetuated fear creep up on me in the back of my mind. Because what I didn't quite realize was that at 12 years old, I'd created a genuine correlation between failure and fear, which looped around my brain like an awful Ferris wheel. And as an overcorrection to my previously unbothered lifestyle, I suddenly became obsessed with being the best at everything, and wholeheartedly ashamed of myself when I was not. When I was the best, I succeeded. When I was not the best, I failed. It was as simple and black and white as that. The rest of my teenage years, which were already pretty awkward enough due to a heavy dose of puberty, would now be attached to the fact that I was genuinely afraid of failure, which meant I became an overachiever and a perfectionist. But what I'd soon learn is that perfectionism never breaks boundaries, and overachieving only existed when I unproductively compared myself to others. But before we get into the doom and gloom that mentality got me into, I just want to take a step back and define what failure actually is and how I'll be using it in this talk. And I disagree with all of them. So when you type into your preferred search bar, definition of failure, the three definitions that come up are lack of success, unsuccessful person or thing, and the neglect or omission of expected or required action. And all three of these definitions suggest that failure exists only due to the fact that we are A, striving for success, like that's what we actually want in life, or B, that success is only dependent on an expectation of others. Which leads us to the burning, fiery failure pit of hell that lives rent-free in my brain. I paid him for that, thank you, sir. You did very well. No, it's beautiful, thank you. I'll give you your money after. So TBFFPHLRFB for short. I do have an artist friend in the audience who said that this was not a good drawing. I did draw this myself if you can't tell. So just a quick demo. Dreams are in this little pot of failure. Those are flames on the side, and then that's fire in the bottom. So I'll just don't be offended by any drawings in this presentation. Thank you. So believe it or not, my entire life path thus far has actually been defined by failure. By the time I was 20, I'm 26 now, I had multiple dreams that I had gotten very far in, but were ultimately crushed by no one other than my own inability to be enough. These crushed dreams now live in what I like to call the burning, fiery failure pit of hell that lives rent-free in my brain, or TBFFPHLRFB for short. So by the time I was 20, I had been, and no, I'm not joking, a failed musical theater star. So I was rejected from every audition at a professional level, and I also can't dance, so that's actually a good thing for everyone. A failed model. I was signed to a modeling agency at 16 and I was dropped because I was too short and unattractive, I suppose, to get any work. I was a failed athlete. I was nationally ranked in show jumping, like horses, but never quite made it far enough to get to the Olympics. And a failed singer. I made music in my bedroom for years. I got signed to a label when I was 18, and then I was dropped pretty abruptly after 9 months. So by the time I was 20, I had these 4 events swirling inside my mind, taunting me day in and day out that I just wasn't enough, and I wasn't successful. And because I wasn't successful, by definition, I was a failure. And don't get me wrong, some of these are relatively impressive achievements, but because I was in the mindset that failure was something to be afraid of, none of my efforts, and therefore myself, were good enough. And as a result, I entered my 20s in a state of pretty severe depression, with this burning, fiery failure pit of hell that lives rent-free in my brain, holding me back from any type of self-acceptance or self-love or self-esteem. The moment my mindset on failure turned around only came about when I was forced to take a break from pursuing any type of career or professional activity, and when I very, very luckily stumbled upon what would soon become my life's purpose. After my 4 failed career attempts, I enrolled in the University of St. Andrews to study art history, which was a subject I was relatively new to, but very much enjoyed. The university sits in a tiny, tiny fishing village in the middle of nowhere, Scotland, so there really isn't anything to do except for study. And little did I know, St. Andrews is also the top-rated art history program in all of the UK, so it actually turned out to be very, very difficult. But as someone who found academics very easy and had a very big ego about it, I enjoyed the idea of a challenge and was confident that I'd be acing all of my exams and papers, until I got my first essay back, which was only 1 mark above a failing grade. I remember reading through the notes my professor had left in the margin, and one caught my bluff on a pseudo-academic point I was making, and it read in giant red letters, "Notable lack of passion." In my defense, it's very hard to be passionate about Islamic architecture, which is what the essay was on. It's very difficult to understand, and I still don't really understand it. But after receiving this grade, which would be the worst grade I would ever receive at university, I sat in my dorm room crying like a giant loser. My whole academic life, I'd easily gotten away with minimal effort and maximum results. And now some random professor in the middle of a tiny fishing village was telling me in order to get a good grade, I had to be passionate. Well, she was very, very right. For whatever reason, being told I was lacking passion was really a breaking point for my ego. After that first essay, I made a promise to myself to only write about things that I was passionate about, not things I thought would get me good grades, because clearly that didn't work. I swore to myself, as soon as something was boring or difficult, and I still do this today, I'd read between the lines and pull out something interesting I could cling on to. And in this process, I discovered the nuance of art and artists, and the puzzle pieces of history they exist in, and I slowly found myself alongside with it. Every artist I researched felt like a friend, and every piece I studied revealed something more about myself. I slowly fell in love with art, and in return, I slowly but surely fell in love with myself, which sounds very, very cheesy, and I'm not gonna play it cool. It was very hard. There were days that I cried, I got bad grades, and I even thought about switching to economics at one point because I thought that would be easier. But what I didn't do, and this is very key, is hide behind a fear of failure. Instead, I let passion drive me through everything I spoke about, wrote about, and researched. And because of this new mindset, my grades and my happiness were both the best they had ever been. Until the real world came knocking on my door and it was time to leave university. Unfortunately, the fiery failure pit of hell, which I thought we had extinguished, came roaring back up, bigger than ever, as I started receiving pressure around me to find a high-paying job and enter the real world as the booming success my friends and family told me I was. I applied to over 50 jobs, most of which were in the art world, but because I didn't have any real art world connections and COVID was at its peak, the only job I actually got out of 50 was at the company we now know and love as Meta, formerly Facebook. Now, as someone who had found their life's passion for art and art history, I was a little skeptical about how Meta would serve me. I was likable enough to get on with clients and strategic enough to build out marketing funnels, but selling advertising products to brands in order to make revenue for one of the world's richest companies wasn't exactly on my list of ideas of fun. But on the flip side, I'd been told by my friends and family that this was the dream job and I had made it. And many of the colleagues I met on my first day truly did feel this way. They were all dripped out in the meta merch, telling one another how grateful we should all be, how awesome it was that we were the world's greatest minds put into one place. And for a while, I tried to join in on this enthusiasm. I lied through my teeth when I said, yeah, like I've always wanted to work here, or yeah, click-through rates are very interesting. So I carried on and pretended to be happy and proud of myself like everyone else was doing. Meanwhile, that failure pit was slowly nudging itself forwards at the back of my mind. And like the overachiever I was, I worked hard to try and get rid of that anxiety from the failure and imposter I felt like, and I soon became the top-rated account manager in my cohort. I even had a case study published of my work within the first 3 months of tenure. I was told by everyone around me, from my manager to my peers, that I was very, very successful, and I should be very, very proud. Because if we're looking at the 3 definitions of failure, which clearly indicate that failure is only when you aren't successful, I wasn't failing. In fact, I was objectively succeeding. But I just couldn't shake the feeling of shame and guilt and disappointment in myself that I had felt in my teenage years. And I think this was largely due to the fact that failure looked something different here. It shape-shifted. Failure looked like leaving the office feeling unfulfilled, going home to an empty house in a country I wasn't from, and not understanding why no one else at one of the world's best places to work at wasn't enjoying themselves. For lack of any other description, I felt lonely and out of place, and although I was succeeding, I had never felt lower. That's an artistic depiction of when the fire is put out, if you couldn't tell. So despite the fact that I was dreadfully unhappy, it actually took me a really long time to accept the fact that I needed to leave Meta, because that was just something that no one did. Especially not a top-performing account manager who looked like they had their shit together. And if I wanted to leave in a way that would genuinely give me a sense of fulfillment in my next job and to reconnect with that sense of passion I'd felt in university, I had to put out the chaotic fire that was going on in my brain. So around this time, I started to see a therapist. One of the first things he taught me about was widening the aperture and seeing things on a scale of 1 to 10 as opposed to seeing things in black and white. Either or, good or bad, success or failure. If I would place my current situation at a level 9 unhappiness, what would an 8 look like? What would a 7 look like? What would a 6 look like? So I wrote out each possible scenario from 1 to 10 in terms of what my ideal life would look like, and in the process of writing out these ideas, the burning fire failure pit in my brain seemed to get quieter and quieter. Because in writing out my ideal existence, I was forced to reflect on all the past experiences that led me to Meta, including those failed careers in acting and singing, horse riding, and modeling. And when I reflected on those experiences and removed the black and white filter I had had for so long, I actually realized they weren't failures at all. They were simply chapters of my life that had once existed on a scale of 1 to 10. And to categorize these chapters as failures would be to kill the thousands of other emotions I felt within them. Joy, determination, anger, focus, passion, frustration, hope. In fact, upon actual examination and widening that aperture, these were all just experiences that taught me unique lessons fueled by passion for a given industry underlined by a very hard work ethic and someone who thought that being the best at something would give them a purpose in life. Which I then realized was just the completely wrong way of thinking. The common denominator between all my pursuits in the failure pit was that as soon as I got to a pre-professional level, as soon as I was on that verge, I fizzled out. In other words, when times got tough, I did not keep going. Sure, I was passionate about everything I did up until Meta. That's what got me to a very high level of performance in the first place. But if I ever wanted to fill any type of potential I knew I had deep down, I would need to dig deeper and combine passion with purpose. So in deciding what my next job would be after Meta, I thought, okay, it can be anything. At this point, I just want to be happy and I want to have a sense of purpose instead of closing my laptop every day at 3 p.m. and playing table tennis. I also want to avoid any type of failure pit flare-ups. So let's work this out by zeroing in on the time that I was happiest, at university. I wrote out a few sayings that followed the structure. As long as I can blank, I can't fail. And this was just a little pep talk I would say to myself every now and then when I would get anxious about the future. So I started with, as long as I can study art, then I can't fail. And then I went a little bit deeper. As long as I can write about art and share that writing, I can't fail. And then I went a little bit deeper. As long as I can break down a complicated subject for people, I can't fail. And then I went a little bit deeper. As long as I can make complicated and creative subjects accessible for everyone, then I can't fail. And this purpose not only spoke to me, it made me realize that I could be 1,000 different things. So I could be a teacher, I could be a blogger, I could be a mother, maybe I could be a carpenter, I don't really know. I could be anything though, because my purpose of breaking down complicated, creative subjects for people would be guiding me through. And as long as I had my purpose, I couldn't fail. A few weeks later, my mother sent me a LinkedIn ad for a small NFT platform at the time called Fair.xyz, looking for someone to build out their partnerships team. In my first interview, I was warned that a large part of the job would be explaining what NFTs are to people who have never heard of them before, and if I was up for that challenge. I accepted my job offer a week later. I now spend every single day working at one of the industry's finest companies that specializes in allowing creators from all different types of backgrounds to create without judgment, in layman's terms, and completely freely. I literally practice my purpose of making complicated and creative subject matter accessible to everyone every single day. And so I guess the uncomfortable truth about failure is that by the dictionary's definition, it doesn't actually exist. In fact, by those definitions, I try to fail at something every single day. If I'm not failing, I'm not growing nor challenging myself enough. What does exist is a conglomeration of chapters in your life that have attached themselves to your identity. So when pressure is intense, they may or may not bubble up into the fiery pit of failure from hell. But when you widen the aperture and remove that black and white filter, chances are they'll simmer down into a lovely temperate pool of potential that you can take from. Or at least that's what I've been telling myself. And that's it.